this guy's name is probably one of the most popular voices as well in our state and in our region, and that's James Spann. And what a pleasure to have him on and to talk about the 9th anniversary of April 27, 2011. James, always great to have you. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, Jay, it's my pleasure to be here. How are you?
Man, doing wonderful. Just sheltered in and, crazy times right now, but we know who's going to pull us through it. We know whose hands we're in, and we know whose ultimate plan and is in control of it all. So that gives me a lot of peace, grace, and understanding.
Yeah, it's I'm old enough to have lived through some pretty odd times. I was a child during the Cuban Missile Crisis back in the '60s in rural South Alabama, and that was kind of an odd time. And but this stuff happens, and we'll get through it. We will persevere. But I know there's a lot of people hurting right now in terms of
There's no doubt about it.
economics. They don't know when the next paycheck's going to be. They don't know. They just don't know, and that uncertainty is just such a horrible thing. So. But we're resilient, and we'll get through this thing together.
Talking about getting back and staying together and getting back on our feet. Back in 2011 on September the 27th. Hard to believe it's been 9 years. But just go through what was leading up to that next day, that 24 hours leading up to what would be one of the most devastating tornadoes that we've ever witnessed, especially in our parts. But just kind of what was going through your mind and expectations of what that day might be.
Well, for us in the weather business, Jay, April, I guess it's kind of like January in the college football world. When you get to January, you're playing at a big time level. You're in the playoffs. You're playing for a national championship. And sometimes in April, it's going to be a red letter day, just a really nasty red letter day. But even then, you don't know. You don't know. Maybe something will happen that will mitigate and offset the conditions that set up severe weather. But in the case of April 27th, we knew going in, everything was there. All the players were on the field to have a really, really bad day. We had that morning round of storms, and we really didn't know how that would impact the afternoon and the evening. And I'll be honest with you, Jay, we didn't expect the morning to be that bad. I mean, we knew there could be storms, but understand that morning, 5 people died, and 250,000 people had no power. And so, we spent the middle of the day working to correct everything that went wrong. We had cameras down, internet connections out. We had microwave paths out, and those engineers did a heroic job. But they got us ready, and then we sustained what would be just that horrible, horrible afternoon and nighttime round of bullets from Hades. It was bad.
James, is there one enduring image or story that sticks with you from 9 years ago today? I know that you have made it a point to memorize all of the names of the victims, and not only that, but their stories. And I know that this day 9 years ago has impacted you in profound ways that most people don't know about, because you take it as your own personal responsibility that so many lives were lost. But is there one story that you can share with us that really 9 years later still is with you and maybe haunts you?
Concerning that day, Lars, I think the moment that I will never forget was when Mayor Maddox of Tuscaloosa called us. This was about maybe 6 to 6:30 that evening. And understand, Tuscaloosa was hit about 5:15. And I honestly thought that he was on the phone to give us an update on the damage and the losses and everything bad that happened there. But no, he was on the line wanting to know what the weather was doing. Everything was cut off. Every bit of communication. They heard another storm was coming, and they didn't know if that was true or not. They didn't know what to do. And I'm thinking at this point, boy, this is bad. For some reason, that moment really stood out in my mind. And Mayor Maddox was just so sincere about trying to help the people of the city of Tuscaloosa and get the word out. And so that's what that phone call was about. And for some reason, that moment, it really started to hit me that this could be an historic type day. We were so busy. During the event itself that we missed it. We missed history. that's the moment where it just kind of latched onto me that this could be an historic type event. In a way, I'm glad I missed it when we were on the air, because if I were to sit back and think about the scale, the magnitude, the loss of life, the human suffering, it would have been overwhelming. And I'm not that strong. I think everybody thinks that they're strong, but I had to be on the air telling a coherent story, because understand, even after Tuscaloosa happened, we had more and more and more and more. It just wouldn't stop. And you can't stop. You've got to be coherent and tell people this is where the tornado's located. If you're here, you've got to go to a safe place now. But that Walt Maddox call really stood out to me, Lars.
Well, I remember, man, James, and I know a lot of times, people forget, and 9 years have flown by, man, because that was my last year in school, and that year meant so much to us because of the tornado, and I can remember hearing your voice, or going around and hearing some of the stories that some of the people that you met and some of the names that you remember. And I was just like so amazed that, how in the world does he remember all these names? And, and you made it a thing to where, you needed to, get into these people's lives to, for you to be a voice for them and for you to be an ear. And I just applaud you for that. And I know Laura said something about it earlier, but I'm just, amazed and still shocked that, you still took that time and, in that time with Coach Saban and stuff, that, man, that it's people like y'all that just amaze me. And I'm just honored to, be on the same radio station with you right now, man.
Well, your words are way too kind. And listen, you look back on it, and I had nothing to say about the day for 6 months. I just didn't talk about it. I didn't know what to say. 252 people died on my watch. And if you tell me one day that would happen in my career, I'd say you're crazy as a lunatic. With all of the warnings, and understand, for all 62 tornadoes, there was an excellent warning that day. And I mean, in some cases, you had 45 minutes to go to a safe place. We can't do much better. The physical science couldn't be any better. So all these people died. So we knew that something went wrong. And as it turns out, what we learned that day is that physical science is not enough. We don't really understand human behavior. We're asking people to do something, to stop their routine, to inconvenience themselves and do something that they don't want to do. And we've got to get better at that. And so the social scientists have stepped in and helped us greatly over the last 9 years. We know a lot more now than we did 9 years ago about severe weather messaging, which, maybe we should have looked at that a long time ago, because all of us in school, we learned physical science. That's all we learned. But on that day, and one other analogy, fellas, the graduation at the University of Alabama did not happen on time. It was held later in the year, much like what we're going through right now. And I look back on that graduation, and that's another moment that I'll never forget, was watching the faces of those parents whose children had died, accepting their diploma on their behalf. That was absolutely overwhelming. You look back at somebody like a Darlene Harrison. Her daughter Ashley was killed. The only child. And if you read Lars' book, you know the story of Ashley Harrison and Carson Tinker. But if you look at that image, you can see the pain in her eyes. It is visceral. You can feel it. And if you don't, you're not human. And that's what motivates me. We've got to do something to mitigate this kind of suffering the next time we have a day like this, or the next time we have just one tornado.
You look at that moment, James, and gosh, I mean, for you, is that the biggest or the worst weather event that you've ever covered?
Yeah, I think everybody has a defining day, and maybe just one or two in your whole life that will define you in your career. Whether you're an athlete and you play football, if you're doing meteorology, and I think no doubt for me that's one of those days. And history will judge me for that. I don't look back and play mental gymnastics on the performance that day. I just know we have to get better. And, that clearly was one of my defining days. And the one thing I regret, Jay, was the fact that we didn't get to tell a lot of stories. I mean, everybody's familiar with Tuscaloosa, and that tornado came up through Birmingham. And I think people know about Coleman. And but there were so many others. There were 62 tornadoes that day. And a lot of these touched down in sparsely populated areas, and that doesn't make them any less important, the lives of the people that were affected and taken by those. The death toll that day was 252, and that's absolutely inexcusable. But I think back on small towns like Hackleburg, That EF5 that came through Hackleburg, understand, that was more violent than the Tuscaloosa tornado. Tuscaloosa was an EF4. Hackleburg was an EF5. We had other EF5s. One came through Smithville, Mississippi, and I don't think that story was ever told. We had an EF5 up in DeKalb County in northeast Alabama. So I really do regret that. But the one thing I do not want to happen is for the memories of these people just to go away. 252 precious people died that day. And I'm trying to get all those names memorized and their stories in time for the 10th anniversary next year. And it's very motivating for me, very motivating.
James, you and I have gotten to know each other quite well over the last few months, and I'm very grateful for that. Two questions for you. One, what was it specifically that was in the sort of meteorological soup that day that created the conditions that then led to the outbreak of tornadoes? And then two, and this is sort of on a very personal level, how did the events of 9 years ago change you?
Yeah, Lars, those are great questions. And in terms of the setup that day, we get setups like that from time to time in the spring, maybe, once every 10, 15, 20 years. But even then, you don't know how it's going to play out. The one thing that stands out to me still to this day, it's the wind velocities and the jet stream level. You go up 20, 25,000 feet, you had winds approaching 200 miles per hour and higher. That's insane. And low-level winds, 5,000 feet off the ground, over 100 miles per hour. And you get wind velocities like that aloft, it gets these updrafts into rotation really quickly. I mean, really quickly. And that's to this day, I don't think I'll ever see a day like that. And understand those days, when they do happen, we call them generational because they tend to happen once every 40 years. That's kind of a biblical definition of generational. And we had a day like that April 3rd, 1974. We had a day like that March 21st, 1932. So in this state, they tend to happen every 40 years. And the next time we have a day like that, I'll be at Elmwood Cemetery. But if you have a day like Wednesday, you've got a chance of severe weather. If there's one tornado in the whole state, and if that sucker comes to your neighborhood, that's your April 27th. So we have to treat all these things, seriously. But in terms of changing me, I think that the one thing that has really hit me is to be a man of better empathy and compassion and consideration of others. In this business, you can get self-centered very easily, really easily, where you get hung up in yourself. I'm going to worry about me and not anybody else. And I think that's true in athletics, too, and in football. It's just the environment that you're in. But coming out of that thing, I was really hung up in the lives of those families that lost loved ones, whether it be an infant, whether it be a grandfather, whether it be a college student. And you get to know some of these people, and I have, and mesh with them, then you realize that what we do, it's not about us. It's really not. It's about serving others. And I think it's true for anybody in any business that you're in. And we're here to serve other people. And so I think my main change to James Spann is I've tried to move from being a self-centered guy, and I think we all fight selfishness if we're honest with each other, to being somebody that's more compassionate for the needs of the people that we serve. I go on television, guys, look, let's say Wednesday, we have a tornado warning, and it's 6:30 in the evening. I'm going to cut off Wheel of Fortune. You guys ever cut off Wheel of Fortune to do tornado warnings? It gets ugly. I mean, they're going to come after you. I mean, we live in an angry society, and now it's amplified because of the current situation we're in. But that doesn't even bother me anymore. I think it did years and years ago because I knew that it was coming, and I just hated it. I just hated it. But no, I don't care. And I really mean that. I don't care. You can attack me all day for cutting off Wheel of Fortune or Bachelor or whatever's on television. All I see is the grieving faces of those that lost loved ones on days like April 27th. And it's made me a better person. It's made me a stronger person and a person of more value in the weather enterprise, I think.
James, real quick, didn't it hit DCH that year, and how hard did it hit DCH? What was the impact on that year when a tornado hit with DCH?
Yeah, Trent, let me tell you what, the people that worked at DCH that night were heroes. Understand, they treated over 1,000 people in that hospital with no commercial power, I think some parts of the building had no water. But let me tell you what, they were ready. They already had charts ready to go with fake names. So when people were brought in, they used those charts. They didn't know who they were. They didn't know where they came from. They had no idea of their medical background, but they were ready, and they treated over 1,000 patients in the hospital that night. You talk about the healthcare folks being heroes today. They were real heroes that night. You had people walking down from Alberta City, bleeding to death like zombies, in shock. They had been in the tornado. They didn't know where they were. They didn't know how badly they were injured. They were just walking toward a light, and they saw that light on University Boulevard where DCH is located. The first patient they saw was an infant that was brought in on a door coming off a truck, and the infant was deceased. And they had to fight through all that. I'm not that strong. I am not that strong where I could see all that and have to fight through it and keep going, but they did. And they served Tuscaloosa in the state of Alabama extremely well. And that's not true of only DCH, but all the other hospitals that were involved in this thing, all the hospitals in Birmingham, their triage units, their ER units, the ER docs, the nurses, everybody involved. I don't start calling out names because I'll leave somebody out. But I volunteer in healthcare. I am the chairman of the board of a big hospital in Birmingham, so I really appreciate what they did that night. It was stunning how well they performed.
James, how much has technology now changed the approach and the ability to reach people? And what would you tell people that are listening right now as we finish up this interview as far as how they can protect themselves and their families even more now with the technology that's in their hands?
Jay, obviously we have a lot of different ways of reaching people now. The iPhone was introduced in 2007, so the iPhone, the smartphone, was 4 years old, 2011. And yet there was some social media back then, but now you have a wealth of ways to reach people, and we prefer for people to watch us on their phone so they can take it with them to their safe place. And now with better cell technology, better cell coverage, better bandwidth, we're able to do that. And we can also reach people through the social media side, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all that, which is great. And it also allows people to send back images to us. We've learned through social science studies that, people don't do much when they see radar, but if they can see an image of a tornado, video of a tornado, then they'll do something. And let me just say this too, and I know we've all got to go, but the one thing we learned, Jay and Lars and Trent, that day, what killed more people than anything else was the siren mentality, the notion that you should hear some magical air raid siren before a tornado. No, you might on a sunny day like today, but you can't hear that in the middle of the night during a raging storm. So everybody needs to have a weather radio in their house. They need to have wireless emergency alerts enabled on their phone and know where they're going. And the other thing, too, is helmets. We did a very, very poor job of reminding people to wear a helmet April 27th. We think 50 people would be alive today if they would have had a helmet on. So wearing a helmet, having helmets is a big deal for everybody. Little portable air horns in case you can't vocalize your need for help, and hard-soled shoes. Those people that walked over tornado debris fields, their feet were absolutely shredded April 27th.